He accidentally captured an outlaw girl. She feared he'd hang her, but not like that. Wild West story. Eli Thompson had never imagined that his first solo patrol as a marshal would be so quiet, or so unpredictable. The sun was just beginning to lower behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Dry Creek, a small frontier town that seemed peaceful enough at first glance. Eli had been raised on stories of the Wild West, stories of outlaws, gunfights, and high-stakes chases. But until now, most of his experience had been paperwork and watching over small disturbances in town. Today, however, he was out on his own, riding the rough trails that cut through the surrounding plains, keeping an eye out for anyone who might disturb the fragile peace. He rode with care, his eyes scanning the horizon. The wind carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and dust, and the creak of his horse's saddle was the only sound breaking the quiet. Eli prided himself on being patient, knowing that many young lawmen made mistakes when they acted too quickly. Slow and steady, he muttered under his breath, adjusting his hat to shield his eyes from the sun. The world around him was wide and open, but the vastness of the plains brought a certain tension. Outlaws could hide in almost any shadow, and any noise could mean trouble. Eli had been tracking a small gang of rustlers for days. They had been stealing horses from neighboring ranches, and their cleverness had made it difficult to pin them down. The tracks he followed led him to the edge of an abandoned homestead, a place where old timber and broken fences whispered stories of years long gone. As he approached, he noticed something unusual. A figure crouched behind a stack of firewood near the corner of the dilapidated house. The figure moved quickly, almost like a shadow melting into the scenery. Eli's pulse quickened. He dismounted quietly, keeping low, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. The figure was small, but Eli could tell immediately that this was no ordinary traveler. Whoever it was moved with precision and alertness, clearly skilled at staying hidden. He signaled for his horse to stay put and crept closer, careful not to startle whoever was there. The closer he got, the more details he could see. The person was a young woman, her dark hair tied back loosely, and she wore worn boots and clothes that had seen better days. A rifle lay across her lap, and her eyes, sharp, calculating, and wary, met his for just a moment before she ducked behind the woodpile again. Eli froze, trying to assess the situation. In his mind, 100 scenarios played out. Could be one of the rustlers, he thought. But a woman? He had heard of women outlaws, but they were rare. Most times women stayed on the sidelines, helping from a distance rather than directly engaging in theft or violence. Still, the danger was real, and he knew better than to underestimate anyone in the West. He took a deep breath and stepped out from behind a fallen fence post, calling softly, "Hey there! Don't make any sudden moves. I'm not here to hurt you, but I need to know who you are." The woman tensed, her fingers tightening on her rifle. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, then back to Eli. For a moment, she didn't speak, and the silence stretched long enough for the wind to seem deafening. Eli tried to keep his voice calm and even. "I'm Marshal Eli Thompson. You're not supposed to be out here alone. Come on out slowly, and we can talk." Slowly, cautiously, she emerged. Eli could see that she was young, maybe barely older than himself. There was a defiance in her stance, a stubbornness that suggested she had faced danger before. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, trying to determine if he was bluffing or if he was truly alone. "Marshal," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with caution. "You're telling me you're the law out here, all by yourself?" Eli nodded. "That's right. I'm the law, at least until I can get some help. But I don't want trouble unless you force me to." He gave her a small, reassuring smile, hoping to convey sincerity. For a moment, the woman's gaze softened just slightly, but only for a heartbeat. Then her shoulders tensed again, and she shook her head. "I don't belong anywhere near your law, Marshal. You don't understand who I am." Eli took another step forward, his hand still hovering near his gun but not gripping it. "Try me," he said calmly. "I've had my share of surprises out here, and I know better than to judge someone before I hear their side." The woman's lips pressed together, and she finally lowered the rifle, though not completely. "Name's Lark," she said. "People don't usually call me that out loud. If they do, it's either because they like trouble or because they've got a noose ready." Eli blinked. The name seemed familiar. "Lark," he repeated. You're one of the ones they've been warning me about? One of the rustlers?" Lark's eyes narrowed. "I might be, or I might not be. Depends on who you ask and what they're willing to believe." Her voice had a hard edge, but Eli sensed a hint of fear beneath it. She expected him to reach for the rope, for the law to demand punishment. He noticed the way her hands twitched slightly, as if bracing for something she didn't want to face. "Look," Eli said softly, taking another step closer. "I don't know the full story yet. I'm not here to hang anyone. I'm here to make sure people are safe, and if you're not hurting anyone, maybe there's a way to figure this out without anyone getting hurt." For a long moment, Lark studied him. The tension between them was palpable, as though the air itself held its breath. Then, with a sudden, fluid motion, she dropped the rifle completely and raised her hands. "All right," she said. Maybe I don't want trouble either. But don't think I'm trusting you yet. One wrong move and you'll regret it." Eli nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. He'd expected a fight, maybe even a gun battle, but instead, he had captured someone much more complicated than he anticipated. She wasn't just a criminal, at least not in the simple sense. There was intelligence in her eyes, cunning and experience that made him realize this young woman had survived far more than he could imagine. He gently guided her toward his horse, making sure she didn't feel threatened, but keeping her within reach. As they rode slowly back toward Dry Creek, Eli couldn't help but steal glances at her. Lark seemed restless, constantly scanning the horizon and shifting in the saddle. She didn't speak much, but every glance, every subtle movement, told a story of someone who had spent a life running, hiding, and surviving on their own terms. Eli's mind wandered to the stories he had grown up hearing, the legends of outlaws and lawmen. He had imagined these encounters as clear-cut battles between good and bad, right and wrong. But now, facing Lark, he realized how wrong he had been. Life in the Wild West wasn't that simple. People weren't just good or bad. They were a mix of choices, circumstances, and survival instincts. It seemed different to be, and here in front of him was someone who had lived a life that was judged by whispers and wanted posters, but who was human, real, and scared. As the sun dipped lower, painting the plains in gold and shadow, Eli felt the first real test of his own character. How would he handle someone like Lark? Could he uphold the law without losing his compassion? Could he see the person, not just the crime? These were questions that didn't have easy answers, and he knew the days ahead would be far more challenging than anything he had imagined. For Lark, the ride was filled with uncertainty. She had expected fear, anger, maybe even violence, but what she found was a strange mix of caution and understanding. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close enough to make her consider that perhaps for the first time, she didn't have to face the law with her life on the line. Still, she remained alert, prepared for anything. The West had taught her well. You never let your guard down. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the sky had turned a deep shade of orange, and the first stars were beginning to peek through. The journey ahead, toward the jail, toward justice, and toward an uncertain future, was only just beginning. But for now, in this quiet, tense moment, both Eli and Lark knew that life in the Wild West was about more than guns and wanted posters. It was about choices, courage, and the unexpected encounters that could change everything. And so, the story of Eli Thompson and Lark, the outlaw girl who had feared the law but not like this, began not with a shootout or a chase, but with a quiet ride through the dust and gold of a dying sun, each of them trying to understand the other in a world that understood very little. The ride back toward Dry Creek was quiet, but the silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Eli Thompson led his horse steadily along the dusty trail, keeping a careful eye on Lark, who rode beside him with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her dark eyes scanned the horizon constantly, as if expecting danger to spring from the brush or the hills at any moment. Eli could tell she was uneasy, but he could also sense that she wasn't used to someone treating her with caution instead of hostility. "I've been out here a long time," Lark finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but carried an edge of nervous energy. "And most people, when they see me, they don't ask questions. They just assume the worst." Eli glanced at her, curious. "Assume the worst?" She nodded. "Yeah. They see my face, hear my name, and suddenly I'm some dangerous criminal who deserves a rope. That's how it's always been. You're different." She looked away, her eyes scanning the tall grass as if she could already see the threats hidden there. "I'm just trying to do my job," Eli said slowly. "But my job isn't about punishing people for rumors. It's about keeping everyone safe, including you." He hesitated, then added, "Even if you're an outlaw, or whatever people say you are, you're still a person. That counts for something." Lark's expression softened for just a moment, and then she shook her head, as if to clear her thoughts. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know what I've done, or what I've seen. You think the law is fair, but it's not. Out here, the law isn't always what protects people. Sometimes, it's just another weapon." Eli nodded slowly. He had heard these words before from older marshals and townsfolk, but hearing them from someone like Lark made him feel the weight of reality. Life in the West wasn't simple. People survived in ways that weren't always clear, and those who lived on the edges of society had their own rules and codes. He couldn't afford to dismiss that truth. For a while, they rode in silence again, the sound of hooves on the dry dirt the only noise. Then Eli decided to break it. "Tell me why you were hiding out there," he said gently. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Lark hesitated. Her dark eyes flicked toward him, searching for any sign of betrayal. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just running from people who wanted me captured, or worse. They don't care about the truth. They just want to see me behind bars or gone. That's why I keep moving. That's why I stay careful." Eli listened, trying to piece together her story. "You're saying they're after you, but you're not really a criminal?" "I'm complicated," she said, her voice quiet now. "I've done things I'm not proud of. I've had to survive. Sometimes that meant breaking rules, but I'm not a killer, not in the way they think. Not really." Eli nodded slowly. He could see it in her eyes, truth and fear mixed together. He realized that his first impression of her as just another outlaw had been far too simple. She was more than a name on a wanted poster. She was a person, trying to navigate a harsh world where survival often meant making impossible choices. As the sun sank lower, the shadows stretched long across the plains. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and sagebrush. Eli felt a strange sense of responsibility. He had captured Lark, but he hadn't yet decided what to do with her. The law was clear, but the right thing to do wasn't always clear in the West. "You know," Eli said after a pause, "it's hard for me, too. People expect me to do what's written in the law books, but sometimes the law isn't enough. It doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain people like you." Lark looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time Eli thought he saw a flicker of trust. "You're not like the others," she said softly. "Most people see me and they don't care. They just want to make sure I'm punished. You actually listen." "I listen because I have to," Eli said. "If I don't understand people, I can't do my job right. And right now, I need to know if you're a danger to anyone, or if someone else is trying to make me think that." For a moment, Lark said nothing. Then, slowly, she began to tell her story. It was filled with narrow escapes, clever tricks, and close calls. She spoke of people who had betrayed her, of friends she had lost along the way, and of the constant need to stay ahead of those who wanted her captured. Eli listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just letting her speak. The more she spoke, the more he realized how resourceful and intelligent she was. She wasn't reckless or cruel. She was cautious and clever. Her survival hadn't been about hurting others. It had been about staying alive. And that made him reconsider everything he had assumed about her. By the time the hills of Dry Creek appeared in the distance, Lark's story had painted a picture of a life lived in shadows, but also a life full of resilience. Eli felt a new respect for her, tempered with the knowledge that the world outside their little trail was still dangerous. Outlaws might come looking for her, and townsfolk might not understand her side of the story. He had to balance the law with his growing understanding of who she really was. As they entered the outskirts of town, Eli noticed people watching from a distance, curious about the marshal riding in with the young woman he had captured. Whispers spread quickly through Dry Creek, some fearful, some angry. Lark's reputation had clearly reached even this small town, and now Eli faced the challenge of keeping her safe while still fulfilling his duties. "Don't worry about them," Eli said quietly to Lark. "They'll talk. But right now, we need to focus on getting you inside safely. We'll figure out the rest after that." She nodded, but her eyes remained alert. "I've been caught before," she said, "but I never thought I'd be caught by someone like you. I was expecting someone mean, quick to judge, not this." She gestured vaguely at Eli, her voice softening. "Ah, maybe people like me are rare out here," Eli said with a small smile. "But that doesn't mean we don't exist." For a while they rode in silence again, the town slowly drawing nearer. Eli thought about the day ahead, the questions he would have to answer, the explanations he would have to give. But for the first time since he had left Dry Creek that morning, he felt confident that he was doing the right thing. Lark wasn't just a criminal to him anymore. She was a person, and that mattered more than any poster or rumor. When they reached the marshal's office, the doors were closed and the streets were quiet. Eli tied up the horses and led Lark inside, careful to maintain the calm atmosphere he had worked so hard to create during the ride. She followed him cautiously, still uncertain but not resisting. "Sit down for a moment," Eli said, gesturing to a wooden chair in the corner. "We'll talk, and then we'll figure out what happens next." Lark hesitated, then lowered herself onto the chair, still keeping a careful distance. Eli watched her, noticing the small details, the way her hands fidgeted, the tension in her shoulders, the quick, alert movements of her eyes. She was clearly nervous, but there was also a glimmer of curiosity, of someone trying to understand the person in front of her. "I know you're wondering what's going to happen," Eli said softly. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise you this. I won't make a decision without understanding everything first. That includes your side of the story." Lark's eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax just a little. "I didn't expect that," she admitted. "Most people don't even listen. They just assume they know everything from a wanted poster or a rumor." "Maybe that's why we're still talking," Eli said, "because sometimes understanding someone takes more than a glance. It takes patience. And I've got plenty of that." As the sun set completely and the first stars appeared in the sky outside, a fragile sense of trust began to grow between them. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. A recognition that neither of them were as simple as the world around them wanted to believe. And in that quiet, tense moment, Eli realized that his journey as a marshal was only just beginning, and that Lark's journey, for better or worse, had intertwined with his. How their paths would unfold and what choices they would have to make remained uncertain. But for now, the ride back to town had changed everything. The law, the legend of the West, and even the definition of right and wrong felt a little more complicated and a little more human. The morning after Eli Thompson had brought Lark into Dry Creek began with a strange calm, but the peace was fragile. The sun rose slowly over the town, casting a soft golden light on the dusty streets and wooden storefronts. Eli was already awake, polishing his revolver and checking his horse's gear. He knew that bringing Lark in had been only the beginning. He hadn't faced the real challenge yet. Out here, the Wild West rarely offered simple solutions. Every choice had consequences, and Eli could feel them pressing on him already. Lark sat quietly in the corner of the marshal's office, her knees pulled up slightly as she watched Eli work. She had spent the night thinking about the ride in, about the quiet words they had exchanged, and about the realization that the world wasn't as predictable as she thought. She had expected fear, anger, or even hostility, but Eli had been careful, measured, and patient. That made her uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. It was strange to feel that she might have someone on her side, even if only slightly. Eli glanced at her, noticing the subtle tension in her shoulders. "You got any idea what people will think when they hear you're here?" he asked. Lark shook her head. "They'll assume the worst," she said softly. "They'll think you made a mistake letting me live, and I can't blame them. That's how the West works. People like me, we don't get second chances." Eli nodded. "Maybe not, but second chances aren't always about the law. Sometimes they're about understanding, about knowing someone before making a judgment. I'm trying to do that." She looked at him, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion in her eyes. "And if I don't cooperate, you won't have a choice," Eli said honestly. "You're in town now, and I'm responsible for you. But I hope you'll want to cooperate. It'll make things easier for both of us." The quiet tension was broken by the sudden clatter of hooves on the wooden street outside. Eli and Lark both turned to see a small group of men riding into town, their eyes scanning the streets with unmistakable purpose. They were rough-looking, the kind of men who had spent more time outside the law than inside it, and they weren't here for a friendly visit. Eli's hand moved to his revolver, and Lark stiffened beside him. The men were members of the gang Lark had been running from, the ones who had chased her across the plains and forests. Eli could see it in their eyes. They had come for her, and they wouldn't leave without a fight. "Looks like trouble found us sooner than I thought," Eli muttered. He stepped closer to Lark. "Stay behind me. We'll figure this out." Lark nodded, her fear mixed with something else. Something like determination. She had survived many dangers before, but this was different. This time, someone she could trust was standing with her. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't entirely alone. The gang dismounted in the middle of the street, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, called out, his voice rough and threatening. "We know she's here, Marshal. Hand her over, or you'll regret it." Eli's eyes narrowed. "You'll have to go through me first," he said firmly. The tension was thick, and the standoff seemed to stretch forever. Eli could feel Lark's heart racing beside him, and he tried to remain calm, thinking quickly about his options. The town was quiet, most people having retreated to their homes, peeking nervously through windows. There was no time to wait for reinforcements, and Eli knew that a direct confrontation would be dangerous. Before he could make a move, Lark's instincts took over. She stepped forward slightly, raising her hand, not to attack, but to signal the gang. "Wait!" she shouted. "This doesn't have to end badly. You don't want to fight here." The gang leader laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "You think your words will save you, girl? You're mine, whether you like it or not." Eli shook his head, realizing that Lark's courage alone wouldn't stop them. "We'll find another way," he said under his breath, his mind racing. He could see that the gang had no intention of negotiating, but he had learned something in the past hours. Lark wasn't helpless. She knew how to survive, and she could help him. Suddenly, the gang surged forward, trying to grab Lark. In that moment, Eli fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked across the street, startling the horses and causing some of the gang to hesitate. Lark, taking advantage of the distraction, moved quickly. She grabbed a loose plank of wood from a nearby fence and swung it with precision, knocking one of the attackers off balance. Eli realized then that Lark was not just surviving. She was fighting back intelligently. Together they began to defend themselves, using the town itself as a shield. Lark ducked behind barrels and crates, using her agility and quick thinking to stay out of reach, while Eli positioned himself to protect both of them. The fight was tense but brief. Eli's calm and careful planning combined with Lark's instincts kept them ahead. Finally, the gang realized they were outmatched in this narrow street and decided to retreat, hopping onto their horses and riding off with angry shouts, promising that they would return. Once the dust settled, Eli and Lark stood in the street, breathing heavily. Lark's hand shook slightly, but her eyes were bright with adrenaline. Eli looked at her, impressed despite the danger. "You were amazing," he said. "I didn't expect that." Lark shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I've had to be amazing to survive," she said quietly. "But thanks." Eli nodded, feeling a mix of relief and concern. The gang would be back, and next time they might not be so easy to stop. He realized that keeping Lark safe would be much harder than he had thought. But he also realized something else. She wasn't just a burden. She was an ally, clever and capable, and together they had a better chance than either of them alone. Back in the marshal's office, Eli sat at his desk, rubbing his temples. He needed to plan, to prepare, to think about what to do next. Lark watched him, leaning against the wall, her mind also racing. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "I know," Eli replied, "and we need to be ready. But we also need to think carefully. One mistake, and it could get worse than it already has." Lark nodded. "I've been running for so long," she admitted. "I thought I could handle it all on my own. But maybe this time, I don't have to." Eli looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of respect and understanding. "You don't," he said firmly. "And you won't, not while I'm here." For the rest of the day they prepared. Eli checked the weapons, barricaded the office windows, and made plans in case the gang returned. Lark helped as much as she could, offering ideas from her experience on the run. They shared a quiet teamwork, each learning from the other. Eli learned how clever and resourceful Lark could be, and she began to see that Eli's cautious nature was not weakness, it was intelligence. As the sun began to set again, painting the town in orange and purple, Eli realized that the days ahead would be dangerous. The gang would return, and there was no guarantee of victory. But he also knew that he had someone by his side who could think fast, move quickly, and survive when others might fail. Lark, in turn, realized that maybe not every lawman was cruel or quick to judge, and that trust, though rare, might be possible. The Wild West was a harsh place, filled with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, both of them felt that they had a chance. Not just to survive, but to face the challenges together. And as night fell over Dry Creek, the distant sounds of the plains carried a warning that their test was far from over. The danger had only just begun, and the next days would test their courage, intelligence, and trust. But for now, they had survived, and they had learned something crucial. Even in a world full of danger, people could find allies, even in the most unlikely places. The next morning, Dry Creek was calm again, but Eli Thompson knew better than to trust the quiet. The sun was barely up, and the soft light painted the town in a pale gold. Birds chirped from the wooden rooftops, and the wind whispered through the empty streets. To anyone looking from a distance, it was just another ordinary day in a small western town. But Eli knew that danger could appear at any moment, and he had to be ready. Lark was still in the marshal's office, awake and alert, listening to every sound outside. Eli had spent the night planning. The attack from the gang the previous day had made one thing clear. They were clever, dangerous, and not afraid to take risks. If they returned, they might not try a simple frontal attack. They might use traps, tricks, or try to catch them off guard. He had barricaded the windows, hidden supplies, and prepared escape routes, but he knew preparation alone wouldn't be enough. "Morning," Lark said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of determination and caution. "I've been thinking. We need more than just barricades. If they come back, we need a plan to actually fight, not just hide." Eli nodded, impressed by her insight. "Exactly. I was thinking the same thing. We can't just wait for them. We need to understand their moves, predict what they'll do, and be ready to act." Lark's eyes brightened slightly. "I can help. I know some of their habits. I've seen how they move, how they think. I might be able to give you an advantage." Eli glanced at her carefully. He could sense that she was serious, but he also knew that trusting an outlaw, even one who seemed to want to change, was risky. Still, he realized he had no choice. Her knowledge might be the difference between surviving and disaster. "All right," he said finally. "We do this together. You tell me what you know, and we'll make a plan, but we have to trust each other completely. One mistake and either of us could get hurt." Lark nodded, her expression serious. "I understand, and I trust you. As much as someone like me can trust a lawman." They spent the morning going over every detail they could remember about the gang. Lark described their leader, the tall man with the scar, and the way he thought about attacks. She described the others, their strengths and weaknesses, and how they often relied on surprise and intimidation. Eli listened closely, taking careful notes in his mind. He realized that Lark's experience on the run had made her clever, resourceful, and cautious, qualities that made her a valuable ally. By midday, they had devised a plan. They would set traps and create distractions to confuse the gang if they returned. They would use the narrow streets and alleyways to their advantage, forcing the attackers into positions where they could be outmaneuvered, and most importantly, they would rely on each other's strengths, Ellie's careful planning and Lark's quick instincts. "I never thought I'd be planning a defense with a lawman," Lark said, adjusting a plank that could be used as a barricade. "This isn't so bad." Ellie smiled faintly. "The West teaches you that alliances come in unexpected forms. Sometimes survival depends on it." The afternoon passed slowly as they reinforced the barricades and set up lookout points. Lark's movements were precise and deliberate, showing the skills she had honed while running from danger. Eli kept watch from a high window, his revolver ready, but he couldn't help admiring how quickly she adapted to the task. She was learning to trust him, and he was learning to trust her. As the sun began to sink low over the horizon, they heard the distant sound of hooves once again. Eli's heart tightened. The gang was coming back. This time, they were more organized, more determined. They had regrouped overnight and were likely planning a full attack. Eli motioned for Lark to follow him to the window. "Stay low, watch their movements, and be ready," he whispered. Lark nodded. Her eyes scanned the approaching figures, noting their positions, their horses, and their leaders' signals. "They're moving in formation," she said softly, "not running blind this time. They've learned from yesterday." Ellie gritted his teeth. "That means we need to be smarter." The gang entered the main street, their eyes searching for any sign of Lark or Eli. They split into two groups, trying to flank the marshal's office. Eli and Lark were ready. Using the barricades and pre-planned escape routes, they forced the attackers into the narrowest part of the street. Lark used a hidden alley to appear behind one of the men, forcing him to retreat while Eli covered another approach from the window. The fight was tense but calculated. Lark's quick thinking allowed her to dodge and confuse the gang, while Eli's careful aim and timing kept them off balance. They weren't just surviving, they were outsmarting the attackers. The gang leader, realizing that their usual tactics weren't working, tried to regroup, but Eli and Lark anticipated his moves. For the first time, Lark saw Eli not just as a lawman, but as a partner. He didn't underestimate her, and he didn't treat her like a criminal. He treated her as someone who could make a difference. That trust gave her confidence, and she moved faster, planned better, and acted smarter than she ever had while running alone. After a tense hour, the gang realized that the town's layout and the skill of Eli and Lark made it impossible to succeed. They retreated once more, cursing and shouting threats. But Eli and Lark held their positions until the last horse disappeared over the hills. Breathing heavily, Lark lowered herself onto a barrel, her hands shaking from adrenaline. "We did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Eli nodded, keeping his eyes on the horizon. "We did. But they'll be back, and next time, it might not be just them. We don't know what other dangers are out there." Lark looked at him, a new respect in her eyes. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, "but I'm glad you're here. I might have survived on my own before, but not like this. Not with someone who actually cares." Eli felt a strange warmth at her words. "And I'm glad you're here too. You've taught me a lot already. About thinking differently, about seeing beyond the law, and about not underestimating anyone." For a while they simply sat together, letting the calm wash over them. The tension of the day slowly faded, replaced by a fragile sense of trust and partnership. They had faced danger together, relied on each other, and survived. And in the process, they had learned something important. Survival in the Wild West wasn't just about skill or luck. It was about understanding, teamwork, and trust. As night fell, the stars appearing over the wide open plains, Eli and Lark made one more careful check of their defenses. They reinforced the barricades, double-checked the escape routes, and ensured that they had enough supplies if the gang returned again. "You think we can hold them off if they come back tomorrow?" Lark asked quietly. Eli considered the question. "Maybe, but more importantly, we'll be ready. We'll be smarter, faster, and stronger together than they are alone." Lark nodded, a small smile forming on her face. "I guess I'm not used to having someone watch my back," she said. "You will be," Eli replied. "And I'm not going anywhere." The night grew deeper, and the wind whispered through the streets of Dry Creek. Somewhere out in the plains, the gang was likely regrouping, planning their next move. But Eli and Lark were no longer just two people caught in a dangerous world. They were partners, strategists, and survivors. The turning point had come. Lark had realized that she didn't have to face danger alone, and Eli had learned that the world wasn't simply black and white. Together, they had begun to change the rules of survival in the Wild West. And though the road ahead would be dangerous, filled with threats, uncertainties, and hard choices, they were ready to face it together. For the first time, both of them understood something vital. Trust could be a weapon as powerful as any gun, and courage wasn't just about fighting. It was about knowing when to rely on someone else. The night ended with a quiet sense of hope, a fragile peace, and the knowledge that the real test was still ahead. But for now, they had turned the tide. And in a world ruled by danger and lawlessness, that was worth more than gold. The sun rose slowly over Dry Creek, painting the small town in soft gold and shadows. The streets were quiet, but Eli Thompson knew better than to trust appearances. The events of the past days had made it clear that the world was unpredictable, and Lark, the young outlaw he had captured, was still a target. The gang that had tried to seize her was clever and dangerous, and Eli could feel the tension in the air. Every sound, the creak of a board, the distant call of a bird, seemed sharper, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Lark sat quietly in the marshal's office, sharpening a knife she had borrowed from Eli. It wasn't for fighting, not yet. She was simply keeping herself occupied, thinking through what might come next. For the first time in a long while, she felt a strange combination of safety and uncertainty. She wasn't fully free, but she wasn't entirely alone either. The presence of Eli had changed something fundamental about how she saw the world. She could survive on her own, yes, but survival didn't always have to mean fear and running. Eli walked in, checking the barricades one last time. His eyes were tired, but his determination was clear. "They'll be back," he said quietly, more to himself than to Lark. "I don't know when, but they'll be smarter this time. We have to be ready." Lark looked up, her dark eyes thoughtful. "We handled them yesterday," she said. "We can handle them today. We just have to stay smart." Eli nodded, appreciating her courage. "Exactly. But we need to do more than survive this time. We need to end it. Make sure they can't just keep coming after you, or anyone else." The rest of the morning passed in tense preparation. Eli and Lark moved carefully through the town, reinforcing barricades, setting traps, and planning escape routes. Lark shared her knowledge of the gang's habits, pointing out weak points and predicting possible moves. Together, they became a team, not just lawmen and captured outlaw, but two people who understood each other's strengths and weaknesses. By midday, distant hoofbeats carried across the plains. The gang was returning, moving with quiet confidence, clearly believing they could take Lark this time. Eli's jaw tightened. "They're coming," he whispered. "Get ready." Lark's hands moved quickly, securing her weapons and checking the barricades. Her heart pounded, but she was calm, focused. The fear she had once carried had been replaced by determination. She would not be caught unprepared again. She and Eli had fought together before, and she trusted him. The gang entered the town slowly, spreading out to cover multiple streets. Eli and Lark watched from a second-story window, noting every movement. They had learned from the previous encounters. Rushing in blindly would only lead to mistakes. This time, they would control the battle, set the terms, and force the gang to respond. As the first of the gang appeared in the street below, Lark stepped forward and gave a small signal. One of the hidden traps, a barrel rigged to block the path, rolled suddenly, forcing the gang to split apart. Eli took careful aim, firing warning shots that caused confusion and hesitation. Lark moved swiftly through an alley, appearing behind a group of the attackers and cutting off their escape. The fight was tense and carefully calculated. Unlike previous encounters, there was no panic, no fear-driven mistakes. Lark's agility and quick thinking, combined with Eli's strategy and calm precision, allowed them to control the battlefield. One by one, the gang members found themselves trapped or forced to retreat. The leader, scarred and furious, realized that his usual tactics were useless. He shouted orders, trying to regroup his men, but Eli and Lark anticipated every move. Finally, with a combination of clever traps and strategic positioning, they cornered the leader at the edge of town. With nowhere to run and no advantage left, he surrendered. Eli lowered his revolver slowly, careful not to provoke the man further. "It's over," he said. "You've had your chance." Lark stepped forward, her eyes sharp but not vengeful. "Leave," she said calmly. "If you ever come back, it won't end the same way." The gang members, beaten but alive, mounted their horses and fled. Eli and Lark watched them disappear into the distance, knowing that the threat was gone. For now, the streets of Dry Creek returned to their quiet, dusty normalcy. Breathing heavily, Lark turned to Eli. "We did it," she said quietly. "I can't believe it. I actually survived this. And we stopped them." Eli nodded, a small smile on his face. "You didn't just survive. You helped me make it happen. You were brilliant out there." For the first time, Lark allowed herself a small sense of relief. She had expected fear, anger, or punishment from Eli or the town, but instead she found respect and understanding. It was a strange feeling, almost foreign, but welcome. Eli and Lark spent the afternoon restoring the town, making sure no traps were left behind and checking on the residents. People peeked cautiously from windows, their whispers spreading quickly. Some were surprised that the gang had been defeated. Others were amazed by Lark's bravery. Over time, the townsfolk began to see her differently, not just as an outlaw, but as someone who had survived against the odds and helped protect them. Later, Eli led Lark to the sheriff's office, where he formally presented the captured gang and explained the events. The sheriff, a stern man with years of experience, listened carefully. After hearing the full story, he nodded thoughtfully. "You didn't hang her," he said, turning to Ali, "and you didn't take the law into reckless hands. You handled this well." Ellie glanced at Lark. "She helped save the town. That counts for something, doesn't it?" The sheriff studied her carefully, then nodded. "It counts for more than you think. Life in the West isn't black and white. Sometimes survival and cleverness matter more than the law. This young woman has shown both." Lark's eyes widened slightly. "So, Not this time," the sheriff said, "but you're not free to go entirely. You'll have to stay in the town, help rebuild, and prove that you're willing to follow a better path. That's your chance to make a real change." Lark exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. I can do that," she said quietly. Eli smiled. "I know you can. You've already proven that you're smart, resourceful, and brave. Now, it's about showing the town that too. Over the next few weeks, Lark began to help the townsfolk rebuild fences, repair buildings, and assist with small tasks. She was careful, respectful, and diligent, and slowly, people began to accept her. They still remembered her reputation, but her actions showed that she was more than the rumors. They were starting to see the real person behind the legend. Eli remained nearby, watching her progress and offering guidance when needed. Their partnership had grown into a mutual respect and even friendship. They still faced challenges, still had to deal with the dangers of the West, but the bond they had formed made them stronger. One evening, as the sun set over Dry Creek, painting the town in warm oranges and purples, Lark and Eli walked through the streets together. The wind carried the scent of dust and wild flowers, and the town was calm for the first time in days. "You know," Lark said, "I never thought I'd find someone I could trust in the law. I thought all lawmen were like the stories, quick to punish, slow to listen." Eli chuckled softly. "Maybe most are, but not everyone, and not me. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't just following the rules. It's understanding people, helping them, and giving them a chance to make better choices." Lark smiled faintly. "I'm glad I met you, Eli. I feel like I finally have a chance at something different, something better." Eli nodded. "You do, and I'll be here to make sure you don't lose it." The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars shining brightly over the quiet town. Lark realized that she had been given a second chance, a real one, not just survival, but a life where she could choose her own path. Eli understood that the law wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about guidance, protection, and trust. And in that moment, both of them knew something important. Life in the Wild West was dangerous and unpredictable, but courage, intelligence, and trust could create hope even in the harshest places. The days that followed were not easy, but they were filled with small victories and progress. Lark became a respected member of the town, using her skills to help others, while Eli continued his work as marshal, now with a deeper understanding of the people he served. They faced new challenges, but they faced them together, stronger and wiser than before. In the end, both learned the most important lesson. Survival in the Wild West wasn't just about guns or fear. It was about choices, trust, courage, and the willingness to change. And for Eli and Lark, the future was no longer just about running or hiding. It was about building a life worth living. Together, in a world where the line between right and wrong was often blurry, but the heart always mattered.